Senator Tim Scott thought he could intimidate a freshman congresswoman on live television. What Jasmine Crockett did next left the Senate chamber speechless and made Scott's political allies question everything they thought they knew about power. The lights blazed in the packed hearing room as tensions reached a boiling point. Scott, red-faced and pointing his finger, had just unleashed a verbal assault that echoed through the marble halls. His voice cracked with emotion as he gestured wildly, his carefully maintained senatorial composure crumbling before a national audience. But Crockett sat there, calm as still water, with something in her folder that would change everything. The contrast was striking. Scott's face flushed crimson with anger, while Crockett remained perfectly composed, her hands folded neatly on the table. Behind them, staffers exchanged worried glances, knowing they were witnessing something unprecedented. The gallery buzzed with whisperings, whispered conversations as spectators tried to process the explosive moment unfolding before their eyes. What happened in the next 30 seconds didn't just go viral, it rewrote the rules of political confrontation and may have shifted the balance of power in Washington forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss these jaw-dropping political moments that are reshaping America. The mahogany-paneled hearing room felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Senator Tim Scott, his usually composed demeanor cracking under pressure, gripped the microphone like a weapon. His voice, normally smooth and measured, had risen to something approaching a shout.
"This is absolutely ridiculous!" Scott's words bounced off the ornate walls as cameras captured every angle of his mounting frustration. The golden light from the crystal chandeliers cast harsh shadows across his face, making his expression appear even more severe. "We're not going to sit here and listen to these baseless accusations from someone who clearly doesn't understand how this process works." The acoustics of the chamber amplified every word, creating an echo effect that made his outburst seem even more dramatic. Press photographers in the gallery clicked rapidly, capturing the moment for tomorrow's headlines. The tension was so thick you could practically taste it in the recycled air of the windowless room. Across the room, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. Her dark suit was immaculate, her posture straight but relaxed. A legal pad sat open in front of her, covered with meticulous notes in her precise handwriting. While chaos swirled around her, she appeared to be the only person in the room who wasn't affected by the mounting tension. The hearing had been scheduled as a routine oversight meeting, but nothing about this moment felt routine. Scott's allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats as his voice continued to rock, their faces showing embarrassment at their colleague's loss of control. Crockett's supporters watched with fascination as their freshman representative maintained her composure in the face of a verbal hurricane. "You want to question my record," Scott continued, his finger now jabbing toward Crockett's direction like an accusation made physical. The gesture was so aggressive that security personnel around the room subtly adjusted their positions, unsure whether the situation might escalate beyond verbal confrontation. "You want to sit there and act like you have some moral authority? Well, let me tell you something about experience and respect." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying an emotion that went deeper than political disagreement. This wasn't just about policy differences. This felt personal. As if Crockett's questions had struck at something fundamental about how Scott saw himself and his place in the political hierarchy. The room fell silent except for the whir of cameras and the scratching of reporters' pens. The air conditioning system hummed in the background, a mechanical counterpoint to the human drama unfolding. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen, but no one could have predicted just how dramatically the next few minutes would unfold. The tension was so palpable that some spectators held their breath, afraid that even the smallest sound might trigger an even larger explosion. To understand why this confrontation mattered so much, you need to know who these two people really are and what brought them to this explosive moment. Tim Scott had built his career on being the measured voice of reason. As one of the few black Republican senators, he'd carefully crafted an image of dignity and restraint. For years, he'd been the party's go-to spokesperson on issues of race and justice, someone who could bridge divides with his calm demeanor and personal story of rising from poverty to the Senate. His journey from a single-parent household in North Charleston to the halls of power had been remarkable. Scott often spoke about his mother's influence, working multiple jobs to provide for her family, and how her work ethic had shaped his worldview. These personal anecdotes had become central to his political brand, helping him navigate difficult conversations about race and policy with authenticity that many politicians lacked. But lately, cracks had been showing in that carefully constructed image. Political pressure from all sides had been mounting, and Scott's usual diplomatic approach was being questioned by his own base. Conservative activists had begun whispering that he was too willing to compromise, too eager to be liked by the establishment. Some critics whispered that he'd become too comfortable, too willing to go along to get along. The pressure had intensified after several high-profile votes where Scott had disappointed both sides of the political spectrum. His attempts to thread the needle between competing interests had left him vulnerable to attacks from purists in his own party and skeptics across the aisle. The careful balance he'd maintained for years was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. On the other side sat Jasmine Crockett, the freshman representative from Texas who'd already made waves since arriving in Congress. A former public defender and civil rights attorney, Crockett had never been one to back down from a fight. Her background defending the powerless had given her a steel spine that many career politicians lacked. Crockett's rise to Congress had been meteoric. After years of representing clients who couldn't afford high-powered legal teams, she developed an ability to cut through political rhetoric and focus on practical outcomes. Her courtroom experience had taught her to remain calm under pressure and to always have her facts straight before making an argument. Her law school professors remembered her as the student who would stay up all night preparing for mock trials, who would research every precedent and anticipate every possible counterargument. That same thoroughness had followed her into politics, where she approached every hearing with the preparation of a lawyer heading into a major case. What made this confrontation so explosive was the context. The hearing was supposed to address voting rights legislation, but it had devolved into a broader argument about representation, accountability, and who had the moral authority to speak for their communities. The room was filled with lobbyists, activists, and reporters who'd come expecting routine political theater, but were about to witness something far more significant. Scott's frustration had been building for weeks. Crockett had been asking pointed questions, specifically his opposition to certain civil rights measures. Her research was thorough, her questions precise, and her unwillingness to accept political non-answers had clearly gotten under his skin. Each session seemed to chip away at his carefully constructed political persona. What made it worse for Scott was that Crockett never attacked him personally. She never raised her voice or made inflammatory statements. Instead, she simply asked questions and waited for answers, her patience making his evasions even more obvious. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, and everyone could see it happening. For Crockett, this wasn't the end.